Hey there, I'm Ivan. Welcome back to the Ivan Outdoors podcast and or my YouTube channel. If you found me on podcast, you can watch the videos on YouTube. If you found it on YouTube at Ivan Outdoors, you can listen to it in your car. You can get it wherever you get your podcast, whether it be the black market, your mom's boyfriend in the basement, wherever. Today, I am joined by Hattie Johnson and Kestrel Kuntz. Hattie Johnson is the Southern Rockies Restoration Director for American Whitewater, and Kestrel Kuntz is the Southern Rockies Protection Director. They're both doing good work over there to keep our access open as best they can and keep the stream information flowing on the ever valuable American Whitewater webpage. If you don't already give to American Whitewater or join, you should join. They do a lot of really good work for us, and it'll keep you informed about what's going on in the river world. They worked on a film called Common Waters in conjunction with the Colorado Stream Access Coalition. And this film, this comes out in 2025 in the fall, I believe. It's about Colorado's access to our rivers and streams. We have really arcane rules around it. In fact, it's really not decided. We kind of have access, but we kind of don't. If you touch a rock, you're in violation. If someone throws a rock at you, you're still in violation. So here's a little bit about the film. I've condensed the trailer a little bit, and then we're going to get right into it with Hattie and Kestrel.
Colorado is widely regarded as a leader and champion of outdoor recreation. But there's one glaring contradiction that unquestionably mars this image: stream access.
Colorado is probably one of the worst, maybe the worst state in the country in terms of providing public access to our streams.
I think it was the middle of the day, and she had yelled at me, "Get out of here, this is private property." She picked up a rock and starts throwing them. This is a navigable river. I have a right to be in it.
The vast majority of people in Colorado see these rivers as a public asset. Colorado law does not recognize that.
Dating back to the settlement era, every river used as highways for commerce were required to be public. Colorado, however, never lived up to this standard. Stream access takes on many forms. It's as simple as wading out to cast a line or launching a raft onto the river.
It's totally baffling to me why the state has proved so hostile to public access rights on our streams, particularly on our navigable streams. Our Colorado Constitution provides that the waters of every natural stream in the state of Colorado are hereby declared to be the property of the public and dedicated to the use of the people.
I want to be able to access these places so that I can fly fish or that my friends can raft. I don't want to take away water rights. I don't want to infringe on those landowners' rights.
We really want to be able to address this lack of clarity that has gone on for the past 40 years.
The opportunity is right here in front of us to clarify the law, and in so doing, we maintain and enhance our quality of life.
I don't care if I never catch another fish in my life. If God said to me, "You've gone fishing for the last time," then I would immediately commence negotiations with Satan as to the value of my soul measured in additional days on the river.
Hey guys, thank you for sitting down with me today, and I appreciate the work that you guys have been doing. By the way, I do want to mention that the river info section on AW has been working a lot better lately. I don't know if you guys have received complaints, but we all rely on that section pretty heavily.
We receive complaints sometimes, and we are making a lot of progress on the river pages this year, and also our website in general. And so we have some.
So can you guys explain to me what is the primary mission of American Whitewater? Like what are the different kinds of work going on? We'll get to the film in a minute. But yeah, what is your primary shtick?
Well, our primary shtick at American Whitewater is to both protect and restore America's whitewater resources,
Mm-hmm.
and then also to enhance opportunities to enjoy them safely. And so we break that really down into three pillars of protection, restoration, access, and within access is also safety. And that stands true for our region in the Southern Rockies, where Hattie and I have really split up that organizational mission. I'm our regional protection director, Hattie's our restoration director, and then we share that river access component. And so that is, I think, what has led to our invitation to this podcast today, is really to talk about that
Yeah.
access part of American Whitewater's work.
Yeah. So, what has your role been with the film Common Waters? Like, how did you get involved? What else do you do with the coalition as well, besides the film?
Yeah, so American Whitewater, as Kestrel was talking about, like access to rivers is really central to our mission. I think I always like to say, like, we're a conservation organization that kind of got here via recreation. We're kind of those people who enjoy being in the outdoors and then are moved to do something to keep those places like they see them. And so because of that, access to rivers across the country is really central focus of our work. And so I've long been involved here in Colorado about what that means. We've been, at the forefront of negotiating access to stream reaches with private landowners, just kind of on a one-on-one basis. We've pursued some legislative pursuits for increased public access in the past, and so kind of really always been at the table for stream access issues in Colorado. A couple of years ago, a pretty a case many folks, if interested in river recreation, whether that's angling or paddling, were aware of, the case brought against a private landowner by an angler, Roger Hill.
Yep.
So Hill v. Warsara or Siwa, I guess how you say it, ended up making its way to the state Supreme Court. And American Whitewater, along with the Colorado River Outfitters Association and Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, submitted an amicus brief, a friend of the court brief on that case, really coming from the position that the case, not to get into the minutia of it, but was one focused on Mr. Hill's right to make the claims that he was wanting to make, and courts he bounced around between federal and state court a lot, and then per the request of the state attorney general, then was bringing that issue of standing in front of the Colorado Supreme Court. And we felt really strongly that individuals have the right to ask these questions. And so that was that case, and our amicus brief there was really the beginning of our Stream Access Coalition. After that case was thrown out, unfortunately, by the Supreme Court, we recognized really had a need to help people understand what the legal issue is here in Colorado. We were also in a coalition to protect the Dolores River and surrounding canyon country, and are friends with and have worked with in the past the Rig to Flip Productions, who's the filmmaker on the project.
Mm-hmm.
And so I called Cody up and was like, hey, I got a new project for you if you're interested. And at the time it was kind of like, can you make us like a 3 to 5 minute educational piece to help people understand like what what rights they really do have on rivers, because there is a lot of misunderstanding around that here in Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of, as a conservation storyteller dove into it, it has developed into what's going to be like a really interesting documentary film about the intricacies of it. So
yeah, I'm looking
Yeah.
forward to seeing it. I'll probably put a little clip up here somewhere, and we'll cut to that in a second. So can we start with we've already started, but can we get like an update on the status in Colorado right now, as far as like if I'm an angler or if I'm a paddler, what are my legal rights? Like, where do we stand today?
Yeah. And so, I mean, where we stand for today, and it really hasn't changed for almost 60 years. But in 1979, there was a Colorado Supreme Court ruling called People versus Emmert.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really the seminal key case that essentially decided that the public does not have the right to float through private property or wade. And after that case, there was the Colorado Attorney General around like a few years later put out an opinion that that people actually can float through private property as long as they don't touch the bed and the banks.
Mm-hmm.
However, the key difference there is that an opinion from the state AG's office is not as strong as a court case ruling.
Right.
So that difference and that opinion has led to more confusion, and is why we see a lot of confused members of the public and our American Whitewater members, and and even private landowners are also confused. And so there's been really like a lack of clarity since then. And in practice, we have we have a robust rafting industry. We have opportunities for people to go boating on a lot of Colorado's rivers. But at the same time, there's this big risk in in both reality and in people's minds that they're going to be floating down a river and potentially get shot at or get entangled in barbed wire. And those are real instances that happen, and that continue to happen. And Hattie and I, at our role at American Whitewater, we get emails and calls almost every year of somebody that has been in this position, either threatened or harmed, or talked to by the police and are looking for support. And the role that we've played in the past couple decades has really been, how can we avoid and address this conflict so that people aren't being taken to court for trespass.
Right. So there's a lot of these incidents happening, is what you're telling me. Because one of my next questions was like, how many cases are there open right now in Colorado? Do you know that, or is that there's no way of knowing?
Like legal cases?
Yeah, like what? Aside the Roger Hill, that one is closed, I believe, right?
Yeah.
So he didn't have standing, they found, right? So
Right.
it's thrown out. But are there any
Right.
other legal battles happening right now?
Not that we're aware of right now. I think, usually what it results from, and in Roger Hill's case, and I believe he would tell you as much, he was specifically trying to push the courts in making a determination on navigability.
Right.
There's federal law that provides access to the public on streams found navigable. And what Colorado, I think the easiest way to sum it up is they just haven't identified any criteria. The Supreme Court in two cases has generally claimed that there's no navigable rivers in the entire state, but they haven't identified based on what test. I always like to remind people that, like, if you're on the Colorado River, as soon as you say you're on a Ruby Horse Thief trip, you're on a non-navigable river per the Colorado Supreme Court but right when you hit that Utah state line, you're on a navigable river. So
Yeah.
Colorado really, in my opinion, the way I would describe it is they've avoided the question. They've not, and that's what Roger Hill's case was really trying to do, is kind of make define what that test would be specifically under federal law, the equal footing doctrine, and kind of what rights that would provide people recreating on rivers.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm not aware of any active legal cases. And I think too, a lot of what we're kind of trying to proactively do with the film is help people understand what that there is this somewhat lack of clarity in the law, and that the fact that Colorado hasn't described that standard, because that is one of the things that, because of that lack of clarity, law enforcement doesn't have, we've got the attorney general opinion that doesn't direct law enforcement to do anything. So it just leaves things really unclear. I will also add that kind of as the result of a failed attempt in 2010 to establish the right to float through the legislature, there was a task force created, a kind of like dispute task force, that, as far as I'm aware, was never convened to address a specific conflict on a river, but was put together a diverse group of people, and set up some guidelines as to kind of like, this is how we're going to, basically Colorado saying like, we're not gonna identify like a top-down law to address stream access, but we have this body to address conflicts as they arise. We heard Kestrel say just a few minutes ago, like there are conflicts. We get the calls. They haven't, even in the 15 years since that task force was set up, hasn't even been convened too. So it's kind of
it's never been convened in the 15 years that it's been
not to address Kestrel. Are you familiar?
They like originally
they wrote guidelines.
Like their short-term directive was to write guidelines, like do some research, come up with a report of what has Hattie said of how to address these issues when they do come up. But the task force, to our knowledge, no longer exists. There is not a current body of members or of people that are available to talk about or send issues to, and so in our opinion it's effectively dissolved since then.
So there's the opinion that we can float down the rivers, but that's just an opinion, and essentially we're not, the Colorado is choosing to not fight this because they want to sort of maintain this odd status quo. So I guess we both stand to lose depending on how it goes, right? I mean, I guess landowners could potentially lose their right to bar us from the waters, and we could lose our right to float a lot of the rivers. That seems a little implausible given the nature of tourism in Colorado and the greater West. So why aren't we pushing more confrontation, for lack of a better word? I mean, I floated the North Fork of the South Platte a couple years ago, which nobody had really been floating from Pine to Buffalo Creek, but it's totally doable. It's good fishing in there. There's several signs of that would imply that you're doing something illegal and that you need to get out of the river. Of course, I did not. And then my buddy paddled it last year, and had a landowner, the guy, I guess the caretaker of the Swan Ranch there, follow him down river, yelling at him and telling me he was going to call the cops and whatnot. So yeah, why aren't we pushing it more? Because it seems like Colorado would lose big time if they shut down public access. A Ruby Horse thief. would be probably
Yeah.
closed off.
Yeah. So, I mean, I can only kind of, speculate as to the thinking of the state. I do think even the best insight we have, and it's been a couple years since I've read it now, but when Attorney General Phil Weiser, he petitioned the Supreme Court to hear Roger Hill's case, and really laid out like this is why we're concerned about that. Before I get into that a little bit more, do want to like try to do like just a little bit of like navigability 101, because there are some nuances to it. So Rogers Hill's case was specifically looking at section of the Arkansas where they had very good evidence of commercial use at the time of statehood. The reason that's important is because based on federal law called the Equal Footing Doctrine, as new states were added to the Union, it was identified that those streams, which were served, I'm going to get the wording wrong, but served as avenues of commerce or were susceptible for commercial use, which is an interesting term, susceptible to. But
I have a question about that, but go ahead. Continue.
They were then, upon the territory joining the Union, they were passed on. The beds and banks of those rivers were the title, so the ownership of the bed was then passed to the state. And Colorado has not, and that's what Roger Hill was saying. He was saying, I have proof that this was navigable at the time of statehood, and based on this federal law, this property is state property and it is not the private property. So that's kind of there. So there's and here in Colorado, that has never that, again, we have these two Supreme Court opinions that say there are no navigable rivers. But what the state has done is not apply that test of commercial use at the time of statehood and look into what is accessible. We'll also say, and I think especially from our perspective as American Whitewater and understanding, the nature of the rivers and creeks that people like to paddle on, there's probably, maybe the Arkansas, the Colorado, the Gunnison, but our number of streams that we could find good evidence to show that commercial use at the time of statehood are maybe limited, but there's tons of rivers and streams that people are recreating on.
Right. There's
because
way more streams.
You're able to.
Right.
Exactly.
Quick question about
the
idea of commercial use. I've never heard anybody argue that commercial use could be defined as like as far back as trapping, because there were pioneer, mountain men, trappers, Native American, who were floating trade goods and pelts up and down these rivers, including Cache la Poudre, St. Vrain, all the ones going east, right? I mean, that is commerce in a traditional use in itself. Why is that never talked about?
It has been used as an example, like floating a beaver pelts. I can't think exactly where, and I wish I was remembering. There was the Arkansas, Roger Hill's evidence for the Arkansas was fantastic, and I think did include some of that. It also, I believe, was like floating timber down. But that is absolute. That's the kind of stuff people, who are looking for these cases. Timber's been an easy one, but the beaver pelts.
Yeah, timber's harder out here because we just don't have the flows to
we don't have the
logs,
right.
Forests, but
But I do think that has been used to show that commercial use.
And what about recreation as a commercial use? Does that count because it's a modern use?
That has been, yes, that's an argument yeah, that we've used and others to kind of identify. And it and I think too, like that, and that's what I was kind of trying to explain, that like equal footing doctrine, like federal law side is like isn't encompassing of those streams, all the streams that would be important to um you know, people recreating.
Right.
And that a more appropriate test, if one is required, would be, you know, identifying rivers that are susceptible to navigation. Can you navigate it, or are people doing it?
Right.
um
Yeah.
and thus, you know, claiming public
That,
right to then do so.
that would be ideal. That would be the ideal
Right,
definition.
right.
So I
And
think,
that's what you have in New Mexico and
yeah,
Montana, and
I think that's would be totally fair. I mean, you know, if you can't float a boat up it, the chances of someone wading up it to go fish, I think that's pretty minimal. Um, and I don't think I think that would probably go far enough as far as satisfying recreational use. Uh,
yeah.
so
And I should say too, all of this, and we have been talking about use, and like regardless, like to access to get onto the river, no matter what the laws are of the use of the river, you do need to be utilizing public property or have express consent from landowners to like go across their land.
right,
Um, this does not mean you can just start walking through people's backyards to go get on a river.
for sure. And I don't think anybody I've ever talked to has assumed, oh, I should be
No,
able to walk across someone's land. But
yeah,
you know, as far as we're doing right to float 101, I'm coming up to a road that crosses a river. There's a public right of way that's 60, 65 feet either side of the center line. I can get down to the river. Can I access at that point? Because I got ran off on the North Fork of the Pooter for trying to do just that. What do you guys think?
Well, yeah, I mean, so it depends on the parcel. And so, you know, some states have like state law that, you know, like any public bridge that crosses a river then guarantees public access. Like we don't necessarily have that in
You know?
Colorado.
Okay.
But if it is public land, whether, you know, state or county or federal land, that allows for public access, there is of course like some, you know, even parcels of public land, or sorry, of federal land that does not allow for public access.
Mm-hmm.
And so not only does it have to be, you know, public land, whether like regardless of the ownership, it also has to, you know, allow for that public access as well. And so it's definitely like case by case basis. I'm not entirely sure of the specific bridge that you're mentioning, but would be curious to take a look at that.
Yeah, I mean, definitely the scenario that I'm asking about is when there's private land on either side of the road, and you have, you know, you could get down to the river and put on within the public easement through that land, right? Because the easement runs 65 feet each side of the center line all the way down the roads. So that's state or local parcel. Anyways, it was a
Yeah.
bridge. We were trying to put up higher on the North Fork than most people do. And, you know, it was totally running. It was definitely floatable. And, yeah, you know, the guy came out, threatened us with the law, and told us that his bulls or his heifers would kill us if we floated through his pasture. And he got pretty irate at the time, so we just moved on. But yeah, I wanted to fight it and just say go for it, you know. But I guess I'm glad I didn't in hindsight. Get a little
yeah.
militant times.
There's only a few states I think that have like a blanket access at
Mhm.
public road bridges.
Yeah.
And then yeah, I think others are
Okay. So
site
there's
specific.
like a lot of right of ways that people use here in Colorado that are, private property, the right of way, and that people are putting on there all the time. So we're essentially, what you're saying is that we are essentially bootlegging that access.
No, I think that in some, like, it's it can be identified on a case by case basis that either the public does have the access, um, or it isn't, or no one talks about it, and that's where, like, I think there are a lot of right of ways that are utilized for public access, but they were expressly done to provide. That was the
Provide the access.
exactly.
I mean, the North Fork of the Pooter access is at a point where the stream gauge is, and so it's just a little bit wider, or the landowner's fence is just a little bit offset from the bridge abutment, and there's a little postage stamp of space where you can pull off and unload your boats, but then you got to move your car down the road. And when we were there, some lady screeched to a halt. You guys can't be putting in there, run, and you better not see you fishing on that. I'll call the police. Meanwhile, it's like 65 miles an hour on that road, and she slams to a stop, and all of these cars behind her are like, just so that she could yell at us. We weren't in the road. We were like, by that time, we'd already parked the car,
Yeah.
Anyways.
Yeah. Unfortunately, you're definitely not alone. I think, as we've said before, like very similar, if not the exact same situation has happened to other people in the past all over the state. I mean, there's examples from the Taylor River, and then I think it's definitely wouldn't want to go without mentioning the incidents multiple that have happened on the Lake Fork of the Gunnison.
Yeah, I have not heard about those recently.
Yeah, right. There's a couple different points to make there. It's kind of going back to your, very, very good point about our like really healthy, strong outdoor recreation economy and tourism based around largely based around our rivers in Colorado. And in the early 2000s, an outfitter called Cannibal Outdoors actually went out of business on the Lake Fork because they were sued by the landowner that was accusing them of trespass.
Mm-hmm.
And they specifically went out of business because they could not pay for the legal fees that were required of them. And so they had to file for bankruptcy. And so that's, I would say, like one of the worst case examples and worst case scenarios of what's happened with these river access disputes in the past.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that in combination with some river access disputes that were happening on the Taylor around the same time is partially what led to the 2010 river access bill effort, and then also that task force that was created out of that bill. But then even since then we still are seeing unfortunate disputes and conflicts around the state. In addition to on the Lake Fork, a couple years ago, we got a call about somebody being threatened at gunpoint on the Lake Fork. And so that is still happening.
And just to bring it back to, I think, one of your questions, or maybe one we started with in this kind of line of thinking, but why don't we, more civil disobedience and go to court?
Yeah, I mean,
that's an approach.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to suggest that, the price, if you get caught, is around $300.
Yeah,
it's just civil trespass.
Yeah,
if we did that in mass, we could get enough people to buy off on to gamble with $300. You would flood the courts. Maybe.
Yeah, I think so. The state of Colorado, at least our current attorney general with Roger Hill's case, made it very clear, that petition to the Supreme Court was really it was really interesting on a number of points, and kind of, at least I think, gave good insight into like where their thinking is, and like,
Mhm.
in my opinion, specifically like where the political power is. But one of the things he did say was like, this isn't, and clearly it wasn't just the Supreme Court. There were three other courts in the process who were like, you don't have standing, this isn't. And so there has been, and what the Weiser said in that petition was, this needs to be a decision of the legislature. This is it's inappropriate for the court system to decide this. It needs to be a democratically elected body that makes
That
these
makes the
decisions.
law.
And so,
Right.
yeah. And so I think and then from our perspective, because we have bad court precedent, we have court precedent twice saying that there's no navigable rivers. I am much more nervous about doing that and taking this to court, because I think the short of the legislature clarifying the law, and the legislature being a body where the outdoor recreation industry has way, and and the culture of outdoor recreation in Colorado can push on those elected officials. I have a lot more comfort in getting a more broad reaching assurance of public access to rivers there than I do, because the courts have just proved to be unfriendly to this issue in the past. And so,
Yeah.
and that's kind of our hope with this film, and kind of next steps is like, we're really making this a broadly public issue, that elected officials are going to have to make a stance on.
Right. Right. It almost feels like right now there's like this cosmic energy that is seeing an opportunity to push back further on public access, or I could have that completely backwards, and it's actually the public who has got this sort of motion behind it that is raising awareness and pushing the envelope so that it is raising issues. Like, and I think of right now in Georgia, I think there's some legislation underway, correct me if I'm wrong, about the state, about right-of-way access itself being legal or illegal throughout the whole state, which would just my understanding is just take tons and tons of miles out of public access. So which is it? Do you think it's there's people like there's negative energy capitalizing on this situation, or is it just enough people are like clamoring for more access now?
I think it's a really good, and especially like, I think there's a lot of the influx of people into the state and people in the outdoors, especially like post COVID, like the COVID bump of use in the outdoors completely overwhelmed land managers, across the West, and definitely here in Colorado. And I think the pendulum swing from that is still shocking. And there is a lot of energy and focus on responsible recreation, recognizing outdoor recreation on impacts on the environment. But at the same time, a groundswell of people who want to get out and be out there and access these spaces and places. So I think it's positive.
Yeah.
I think it's positive. And I do think, I mean, I really see this issue as one of like, of the people versus kind of the privileged few. Like it's, as, influx of more and more, millionaires and billionaires into the state buying up, like, I think for a number of reasons, this issue has kind of been this, I keep referring to it as kind of an uneasy truce. Like, for the most part, you can float through and we won't really yell at you, but you better not stop and anchor or
right.
touch your toe to a rock in the river, and we'll be all right with it. Or in some cases not, as it sounds like you've unfortunately experienced. And like, I think to think that easy truce will continue, I think is short-sighted. And I do think like the interest in conservation of lands and waters and outdoor recreation in those places is really a, you know, a popular position to be in. That being said, I think the people who would prefer this don't happen are moneyed and powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think about like the Wigwam Club on the South Fork of the South Platte there, where you is well known that they will take you to task for paddling through their section of the Platte River, even though people paddle the section above it and below it just fine. And it's hard to find people willing to push that boundary because they are so wealthy there. Okay, so newbies and fences. Two different questions. First of all, fences and obstacles. If you do come to one and you are paddling through, are you allowed for self-preservation to get out and avoid, say, a barbed wire fence, a cable, or a low head dam, for instance? What are the legal ramifications there?
Technically, the law does not currently allow for portage around dangerous obstacles
Even okay,
unless you have explicit permission from the landowner.
which nobody has. That's impossible.
So, there are cases where that is allowed for, and it's more common with river outfitters.
Right.
And there's a couple cases where river outfitters can portage around and portage their guests around, like low bridges, for example.
Mm-hmm.
It is our opinion and stance at American Whitewater, like we do not encourage trespass by any means. We also want people to be safe on the river,
Mm-hmm.
which is, rivers are inherently dangerous, but when there's man-made obstacles, like we encourage people to do what they need to do to stay out of danger.
Yeah. All right. Newbies. There's been a huge influx, as you pointed out, of people getting into the sport. What advice would you have for them as far as, access and making sure that we don't make the situation worse right now?
Yeah, I mean,
other than just use public access.
Yeah. I mean, I think the best advice that we can give people is to be educated, to understand that our rights on rivers in Colorado are fairly limited.
Mm-hmm.
And I think most importantly is to have a lot of respect for private landowners, and to have good river etiquette. And so a big part of becoming a new river person, regardless of what kind of craft you're on, is hopefully when you're getting that education, whether formal or from your friends, that also comes with how to be a respectful river user. And so that means, having the right safety education, not getting out on people's private property to have a picnic, and also, sharing your love and passion for protecting rivers too. And so, kind of bringing it full circle back to our mission is, we're really like in the business of supporting river recreationists because we believe that there's going to be some of our strongest river stewards as well.
Right.
So, I think we really believe that all those things are connected. To be a, responsible river user also means playing your role to protect these places for the future.
And off of that question, how do I want to phrase this? What rivers need more attention, i.e. more love and more awareness? Like, what are the rivers that are in danger, the most in danger, flying under the radar? You mentioned the Dolores, but are there any others, or should we just talk about the Dolores?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of rivers in the arid West in particular, but in Colorado, some of our priority rivers right now are the Dolores River, the Crystal River. We're working on protecting water quality in the Arkansas River watershed as well.
What's going on there? I didn't know that there was an issue.
So there's not necessarily an issue, but there is a lack of state water quality protections for streams that already have good water quality. And so the goal is to protect the resource that is already there and has the potential to be degraded in the future.
Okay.
If the protections are not put in place.
All right. Awesome, you guys. I know you guys have to get to another meeting. Thank you so much for sitting down with me today. I really appreciate it. And if I can do anything else, let me know. And hopefully we'll get some more people motivated to pick up the fight.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Evan. Thanks for having us.
All right. You
This was
bet.
fun.
Have a great day, guys. Good to meet you.
Yeah, you
You
as
too.
well. Thanks.
All right. Bye.
Bye.